talk about this stuff publicly.
It is hard to talk. Yeah, especially publicly. I guess I would just say, I mean, it's obviously nobody's business what you're going through. At the same time, the more we can talk about this openly, the less stigma there is around the topic. So whenever there are people willing to talk, I'm just super grateful.
Yeah.
Well, we've identified this as like probably our biggest challenge.
Okay.
I've been running round in circles, chasing my tail and lost my way.
We're not doing live, is that correct?
No.
No.
Not
Okay.
live.
All right, so you're gonna edit.
We're gonna like.
In case we say something embarrassing.
Yeah.
Say something. In case we give TMI, right?
How about if I say something embarrassing?
No, you don't. You're past.
You can say whatever you want.
You're past feeling.
It's hard to talk about this stuff publicly.
It is hard to talk. Yeah, especially publicly. I guess I would just say, I mean, it's obviously nobody's business what you're going through. At the same time, the more we can talk about this openly, the less stigma there is around the topic. So whenever there are people willing to talk, I'm just super grateful.
Yeah.
Well, we've identified this as like probably our biggest challenge.
Okay.
Yeah, it was unexpected, but it's good. It's good because we are learning. I'm not like mad about, our transition out of Mormonism where I was living in a bubble. I'm not mad about it. I'm happy about everything that we're learning. But as you know, because you've coached and helped a lot of people through the transition, and I'm sure you understand that there's just layers and layers of things that you're going to have to deal with.
Right, for sure. Well, and pornography isn't a Mormon issue per se. There's plenty of people that struggle with misinformation or ideas or stories that we talk about in regards to pornography that are not necessarily, unique to Mormons. So I think it's a good dialogue to be having because it affects so many people regardless of their religious affiliation.
Right.
Yeah, so true. So let's see. In the last episode, we did go over a lot of, how the false information about pornography, which was very helpful. And also, you do explain in great detail on your podcast and in the Mormon Transitions podcast about the pornography addiction is not really what people are making it out to be. I think there's this blanket statement that if anyone looks at pornography that they have an addiction. And so that's one thing that I think we did a good job at addressing a little bit in the first episode. But I think some of the things that are like newer things that we've run into since then, because overall I think we did really well for a long time. And then just a few things kind of...
I don't think so. I really don't.
Oh.
I want to explain kind of what happened.
Okay, I thought I did really well.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Well, we're going to bring both your stories to the table. Woohoo!
Yeah. Well, because, of course it's...
I want to explain to her what happened.
Yeah.
Because otherwise she doesn't really have context.
I'm trying to...
So here's what happened. When we talked to you the last time, and then Crystal, kind of felt like we had gained some, we had kind of found some healthy beliefs around pornography and so forth. Well, then what happened was she kind of made up in her mind or in her subconscious that she was going to please me in such a way that I would never, ever, ever need pornography ever again. And so it's almost like she went on this, battle against pornography. And then she framed it as like, you can tell me if you need to look at pornography, you can tell me. Well, I felt really uncomfortable with that, because I'm sitting there thinking all the things she said about pornography, all the fears she's had about pornography, and every now and then she would kind of leak these insecurities around pornography and around seeing other women, or me seeing other women. And so I never agreed to tell her if I'd ever viewed, if I was going to view pornography. And I didn't like the feeling of that anyways, because of all the guilt I carried around pornography in the church, and all the heartache and the shame and all the hopelessness, feeling defeated and powerless, and crying even, and begging God to not ever to take that away, that I would never want to see that, that I didn't like lying about it. And so then what happened was, a long time went by, like 3-4 months, and then I was in the bathtub and I said, Crystal, it's so cool. You know, ever since we had worked on this pornography stuff, I really don't have I don't have much of a taste for pornography anymore. And then she goes, well, what do you mean don't have a taste for it? Have you looked at any of it? And then I was like, she said it, you know, in a very accusatory way. And then I said, well, yeah, I've looked at it. And then a while ago, and then she goes, she just snapped. I mean, she just popped a gasket. Like, she started screaming at me and saying that she's not enough, and she's been giving me sex as much as I want. And then she says, you're just probably a porn addict. You probably beat off 5 times a day to pornography. And then she said, I probably have a girlfriend, and it freaking got out of control. I mean, it went freaking nuts and insane. Anyway, that's where it went. And then it got so bad that it just went south from there. And we just fought like as bad as we've ever fought before. And she said she wanted to divorce me and stuff like that. And I canceled a party that we were planning, and that lit her on fire. But anyway, it all stemmed from her. She wanted me to be accountable to her. And I was like, I never agreed to that. And I just don't want to agree to that, because I know that there's certain times where she is feeling insecure and she doesn't. And then, you know, we listened to your podcast again, the first one we did, and you were like, well, there's certain things that, you know, you don't have to tell each other everything. And so I thought that was healthy to hear again. But yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to share, because ever since then, she was so serious about divorcing me. She was going crazy. And sometimes she just threatens divorce. But this time she was like, I just don't. She was saying things that were just batshit crazy. And I started to believe her. And it's taken me like 3 weeks to even start feel like she loves me again.
Well, I think the problem was, like, we thought in the beginning, I think I just assumed that, like, well, it was my fault that he needed pornography sometimes, because I was like this Mormon, you know, that was, first of all, had a lot of guilt and shame around sexuality. So it was like sometimes I just wasn't that into it as much as, you know, I think I can be now, because I'm different now, as, you know, when it comes to the changes in my brain. But so I just thought, okay, well, it was my fault because I was just this prude Mormon, and, you know, I wouldn't always feel up to it. And so it's okay if he needs it and I'm not in the mood, you know, like, so in my mind, I'm like, yeah, that's fine. So that's how I made sense of it. But then, like, everything has been good with us sexually, and so I just assumed that he wouldn't, like, need it. And I like, we'll watch it together and we enjoy it together, so it's not like I judge it in that way. And I don't always feel jealousy. It's just, I don't know why it just triggered me, you know.
Okay, so I guess my first question is, Crystal, I mean, just, you know, Sean just said a big story from his perspective. So is there a part of that story that you would tell differently?
Well, I think trust, you know, like, not that I don't trust him, but it's hard to, like, I think, and it's not always all about Sean too, it's about the church, like, feeling like I've been jaded because Like, I lived in this bubble. I thought the church was true. I thought Sean didn't look at pornography. I didn't think men at all looked at pornography, men in the church. You know, I just believed that, like, men don't look at that. Good men don't look at that. And then to have everything all at once, like, it just makes me feel like I just got to a place where I just, like, hated a lot about, I just feel like I couldn't trust, you know, people.
Can I share one more thing that happened?
Yeah.
So she had asked me point blank on several occasions. She had said, have you ever fantasized about having sex with other people? And then I knew what was permitted in terms of the answer to that. So I would say no. And then I was at convention, and it was August, early August, and I was feeling like overwhelming love for Crystal, and we were doing so good. This was obviously prior to this most recent thing, but I was at this convention, and then I was feeling like overwhelming love for Crystal and everything we've been going through, and just our relationship. But I had this kind of this haunting feeling like, you know, she asked me this point blank question, and I just lied to her about that, just like I lied to her about the pornography for all those years. And so I called her and I was like, hey, I want to tell you something. I just don't feel good. You know, I want to feel like, you know, like I'm an honest person, and that you can trust me, that I give honest answers and so forth. So I was like, I have fantasized about other people before. And, you know, my hope at the time was like, because I really was coming from a place of love, and I was like, either this is going to go really bad, or I was hoping that Crystal would be like, oh, honey, it's okay. Like, we're being honest with each other now. I've done that too. But she freaking lost her mind. I mean, she went crazy on me, and she started accusing me of all kinds of things and saying that I probably had relationships with other people and been soliciting other people and flirting with other people. It just went crazy. So that was the other thing. Those are the two big things that have caused a lot of pain and heartache and really set us back.
Well, yeah, and I think it's because, like, you live in this bubble, and then you think things are a certain way, and then when they're not, your brain wants to, like, make it into this big, even crazier story, you know? So I think that I was creating this story that I know is not true, but I lost my trust for everything all at once, you know?
Well, so first of all, I'll just encourage us to stay away from provocative language such as batshit crazy. I'm guessing, I don't know if you would agree with that or not, Crystal. I'm guessing we could probably say you had an overreaction, maybe, right? Or even like out of proportion reaction to maybe the status of how you were currently being in that moment, right? Like you're describing that you're kind of in a good place and you're feeling fairly connected, and then you get this information and your reaction is kind of out of proportion from what you're currently living. Is that a fair way to say that? I mean, I don't know what your experience is like, Crystal, when he says batshit crazy. Maybe you're like, yep, you're right. I was totally batshit crazy. And I've done that too with my husband. I just wonder.
I created this story that, you know, it's like, I know that he doesn't have a girlfriend. I know he's like not cheating on me, but it's like my brain like wanted to create that story and wanted to believe that story in the moment, you know?
I say crazy because like she did some crazy things. Like she actually started banging on the door. I was asleep in the other room and she started banging on the door. I was literally asleep and she said, "Are you jacking off in there right now?" Like totally unreasonable.
Yeah. So totally unreasonable, totally out of character, right? Yeah. Totally out of the norm of what your what your typical experience is like together.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So those reactions, I think, are really good information fodders, right? So can we talk a little bit about what you think that reaction tells you about yourself? And Crystal, I don't know that I would say that you're the one that's created those stories. I mean, what are the stories? What are the stories that are told to us about these things that maybe, what's that reaction about? Where did it come from? What are you afraid of? What are you worried about? What are you distressed about?
Yeah.
What are you batshit crazy about?
It does have to do with the church, really, the teachings of the church, like that is like the worst thing that could ever happen in your marriage, and you know, and that it is a problem, that it is an addiction, and it is bad. And so my brain just goes off of those beliefs and decides that, well, that means that he's doing everything crazy, you know, he's gonna cheat on me, and yeah, and that it's bad. So in my mind, it's just, I go back to the Mormon mentality, and I think it's all bad.
I feel like it's irrational because she's actually, in the last 3-4 months, Crystal has employed pornography to get to a state of climax far more than I have. She's actually looked at pornography by herself way more than I have. And so it almost doesn't make sense. Logically, I can't make sense out of it.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things that we talk a lot about are emotion versus logic, right? And we think sometimes that logic is the better or the more mature thing, and that emotion is really bad. And a lot of times that's kind of true, but emotion in us has been compared, like by the work of Jonathan Haidt, has been compared to like an elephant, and then logic is kind of like the rider up on top. And so if your elephant's moving in a direction, there's not much the rider's going to be able to do about that. Elephant.
That makes sense.
Right?
I appreciate that.
Right. And so but that doesn't mean that emotion is bad necessarily either. And that's why I think it's important to see it as an information gatherer, because if I'm hearing you both correctly, it seems like some of the stories are, one, this is the worst thing that could ever happen to us. Right. And so if you're feeling close and connected and you've been through all of this stuff together, and you're actually feeling closer than ever, to have something come in and say, there's something here that's threatening all of that. It's threatening all of that. Everything you care about, everything you love, is threatened. And then on top of it, it's not just a problem, it's an addiction. It's a disease. It's something that we're never going to be able to fix. Right? Because addictions kind of are seen from that perspective of once an addict, always an addict. I'm also hearing like the slippery slope story. So it's not just that if you're doing this, that means it's going to mean either you are doing 10 other things, or it's going to lead to you doing 10 other things. So now we can't even talk about this one thing because we're entertaining 500 other things that could possibly be happening. The story you started with was, I haven't done my job as a wife, right? So if this is happening, then there's something threatening my role as your wife. I'm not, and then what's the messages there? What are the stories there? I'm not enough. I can't control this. And it's very attacking to your self-esteem, right? As a woman and as a wife and as a lover, especially maybe. I mean, just because you've gone through some transitional thinking, it is different to do something together than to know your partner is doing something on their own. So even if you're enjoying some erotic imagery together, that feels very partnered. That doesn't have the same story as he's doing something sexually on his own, or that you have a fantasy about another person. So all the stories that we've been given, not that you've created, that we've been not just given, but like kind of hammered into us, have everything to do with threat, right? And so then when you put it into context, was it really that batshit crazy? I mean, if your system is acting like this man that I love and this man that I've dedicated my whole life to and that I have children to is threatening everything I know about us and myself even, is it really that overreaction, when you put it into context?
Yeah, I did feel like I was like going through a second version of the Dark Night of the Soul, like just like, what does all this mean now,
Mm-hmm. Well, and this is why I'm such a believer that information is so pivotal, correct information, right, and education, because so many of these stories are based in just flat out misinformation and lies and incorrect cultural myths and folklore, and then but your elephant doesn't know that the story is a lie. Your elephant's just living the story, right? And so I think, but with information, we typically can tame the elephant, and then we can get to a position where the rider can move the elephant, into a space that happens with education and self-awareness, right? And so then the elephant and the rider are more in sync together. But you can't logic out the elephant from these feelings and these stories that you've been saying that, it's only been a year and a half since you've transitioned away, and you spent a life in these stories, and how you identified yourself as a woman, how you identified yourself as a mother, how you identified yourself as a moral person, how you identified yourself as a wife, right? It's very, very complex, and it doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen even with just one podcast, right, where we'll share information. You have to let the information trickle into and get absorbed by the elephant, and that takes time and practice and self-awareness.
Yeah, it's true. Like I think I just assumed, okay, everything's great. Like we worked through that, if it's like, and then it all came up again in this way, like that was totally unexpected. I just never would have thought that I would feel all those insecurities all over again, because I felt like I got the proper information about it, and I understand that pornography doesn't have to mean anything about me, and I keep telling Sean the way I can feel at peace and calm about it is by realizing how it has helped me at times, so I don't feel, it doesn't make me want to cheat on Sean. It doesn't make me think that Sean's not enough. It doesn't make me think I wish Sean looked like that. It's so, those are my fears around pornography, and so I just have to like remind myself of how I view it, and it's just all physical, and it's not anything that feels threatening to the way I feel about Sean.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting point, that as you've opened yourself up to allowing that type of, I guess, material to be part of your erotic life, that you haven't come to those conclusions, right? Like you've kind of put it to practice. You've been in the experimental lab to see if, well, if I do see this, hot chiseled body or whatever that's younger than my husband, or maybe slightly less, I don't know, whatever issues your husband has as far as physical flaws, is that going to make me want to run off and, be sexual with that particular person? Or is that going to decrease my attraction to my husband? And we don't find that that's the case really through the research at all. Like those things are not correlated at all. And, but especially I think in regards to women, where we have been primarily taught through the lens that our bodies, our physical attractiveness is considered a big part of how we're considered worthy by our culture, whether or not we're enough, whether or not we are good enough, whether or not you've landed a hot enough person, that messaging tends to be stronger towards female bodies than male bodies in our culture. It doesn't mean that males don't get that either at all, because I think physical attraction is just it's something that, the media for sure, advertising and products and marketing have made a huge deal about, the fact that none of us are good enough, look good enough, feel good enough, therefore get this product that will help you, do those things. So we're all bombarded with those topics of not being good enough, but women primarily so, in much higher quantity, get those messages. So, and then you mix that with the message of romantic love in our country, Western kind of romantic notions that are very kind of ownership based, is how I kind of phrase that, meaning that the classic love song has something about the idea that you belong to me and I belong to you. And doesn't that sound super romantic until it doesn't, because that's an ownership status. and we typically don't want to be owned or, have some form of like power differential where now I feel controlled by, or feel like I can't, like I lose a sense of my individual self because I want to be partnered with you. So that's a very tricky balance that we have in all couples, is the we versus me type of dynamics, right? So, I'll just say a few things. One thing that comes to mind is sexuality. Our aspects of sexuality are really not any different than any other aspects of our individual selves. So, for example, if you're an introvert or you're an extrovert, you're going to like social status more than alone status, depending on how you lean in those directions. I'm an extrovert and I still really like my alone time. What do I do in my alone time? Well, I might read a book or I might watch a show. That doesn't mean that I don't like watching a show with my spouse, or that I don't even enjoy talking about a good book or listening to an audiobook with my spouse. But there are times that, I enjoy eating alone. I enjoy eating in company, right? I enjoy entertaining myself alone. I enjoy entertaining myself in company. And so sexuality is really no different, and yet we make no room for that in this kind of coupled romantic space where it's all going to be about the togetherness of it, and anything outside of that is seen as a threat to the relationship. But we don't do that in any other area unless it's out of balance. Like if all my husband is doing is going with his buddies biking, and I feel like, okay, they got 10 hours of your time this week and I got like half an hour of your time this week, then yeah, I'm going to have a problem about the bike club, right? So we tend to have problems when there is an actual time balance issue where we don't feel prioritized. But sexuality is no different. There's coupled sexuality we really enjoy, and there's also private sexuality that we enjoy, whether that's in our fantasy world or whether that's in our masturbatory practice or solo sex practice, however you want to say that, or whether that's viewing erotic imagery, which you might call pornography. But I would say it's also in other things that are maybe not as in your face. Like there's lots of erotic literature. How many people are watching The Outlander these days? That's pretty hot and steamy. And a lot of women in particular like watching those kinds of shows on their own because they feel maybe nervous or anxious or don't like having those kinds of scenes where there's other people, but they do enjoy it on their own. It allows for the escape fantasies and the romance feelings, and it's arousing and it's fun. So erotic kind of material can come in a lot of shapes and forms: music, literature, art, poetry, video, and it can come in a diverse sense of, I guess what I would say, explicitness, right? So there can be very explicit novels, cartoons, videos. There can be kind of less explicit novels, cartoons, videos, right? And so it's all on a spectrum of what people enjoy. The next thing I'll just kind of talk to you guys about is, it feels like you had the mistake that most couples make, which is that you had a contracting issue. So you came across some new information, you made a lot of assumptions, you had some discussion, you didn't really contract correctly. Meaning that
disappear. Okay, you're there. Do I need to record again, or is it recording?
Recording.
Okay, we're back.
So I don't know.
You were saying something about contractual.
Okay.
We made some false assumptions around a contractual thing.
Okay. So we're still recording. We're good.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
That last part saved. Do you think?
I think so.
Okay.
I'm guessing it was saved up until you could see me or hear me. Okay. So I'll just start off with, so I think that you probably made a very common mistake, which is that you had a discussion about some things, you heard some information, but you probably made a lot of assumptions about what that all meant. and you went off you went off with that, and then didn't really contract more specifically or detailed, because it sounds like, Sean, you were surprised when Crystal started asking questions about whether or not you had looked at porn. Like you had thought maybe we were past that, or that wasn't an expectation that she had of you. And then Crystal, of course, you were surprised, thinking that maybe he was going to be more forthcoming about things like that. And so now we're not in a porn issue, we're in a secrecy contracting issue. And secrecy absolutely will drive you crazy, you know, in a relationship where it does kind of erode your trust or your ability to feel like fooled, or like, you know, like you weren't in the know somehow. That's kind of one of the worst feelings, right? Is to feel those kinds of things in a relationship.
Yeah. The underlying reason why she wanted to know was not a trust issue. It was more so, in my opinion, her wanting to know if she was successfully pleasing me enough. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
And so she and she even said things like, I didn't tell you everything she said, but she said things like, I have made it so good for you. How come I'm not enough?
Right.
So she's trying to compete with the porn. To me, that's the underlying issue. And which you're right. I need to be sensitive to that. Of course I need to be sensitive to that, but I actually sincerely have way less of a desire to view pornography than I ever did in the past, which I think is a miracle. And I was like saying, well, that's amazing. Like, seriously, I really think that's so cool. But I don't feel like Crystal is a safe space at this point in time. And I know she wishes that she was. And I think that I'm a safe space. I think that Crystal could tell me anything and I could process it, and I could be like, well, you know, I know she loves me and I know that I can trust her and so forth. But at the same time, I'm on the other side of this. So I spent 15 years lying about viewing pornography and knowing that it didn't make me go cheat on her, and it didn't make me, you know, it didn't make her not enough. So I'm sensitive to everything you're saying.
Well, I think that it you know, like there were times where I would, you know, like I'm busy and working on something and he wants to have sex and I'm like, no, go ahead, go have fun, go watch porn, you know? And so I've felt like, oh, we're in such a good, like, open communication about this, and I feel like I'm being supportive of it, and I like that he feels like comfortable with me. And so I just like assumed, first of all, that I knew about all the times that he used it, because, you know, I would like suggest he go do that or something, or he would, yeah. So I just thought I knew, first of all. Second of all, I did think that I was fulfilling all his fantasies and that he wouldn't need it. And he's on top of, you know, all that. And then the third thing is I guess I was just surprised that he didn't feel comfortable telling me, but also at the same time, I think I did say, like, it's okay, like, you don't have to tell me, but I think I just assumed that he probably would, because he did tell me the certain times. And so I thought we were like, had this open communication, no shame, no guilt around it. And then, yeah. No, that makes sense. I mean, it does go back to the contracting issue, right? Is that I think, Crystal, you figured, well, if you want to have that you, first of all, you correlated porn to needing sex. And so you're like, well, if you need sex, and you'll come to me, and then if I'm not in the mood or whatever, I'll kind of steer you towards the porn, and then it's kind of like a mutual decision, and right. I feel like I'm involved in that, and I feel like that's good. So that's how you were assuming the contract had been contracted. And some people do contract it that way. You know, some people, that's kind of how they make a compromise, right? Is that if instead of going and viewing porn, I will
always come to you first and see if you're sexually available. And if you're not, or whatever, then we're both okay with porn being an option. So, and that's okay. And that usually has to do with values. The problem with that is that, or the only problem I see with that is that watching porn isn't necessarily about needing anything. I mean, when I watch like my Netflix show, I don't need to watch my Netflix show. I like to watch my Netflix show. And it's relaxing and it's fun and it helps me escape and it helps me kind of have a minute where I don't have to think about my kids or my spouse, or it's me time, and I like it. I don't need it.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's where some of that contracting goes awry, is that, again, we're kind of contracting from false assumptions about what porn viewing is about, or anything. And we don't make those same assumptions about other activities. Right. And so, if you really liked watching, I don't know, I mean, if you really liked reading 50 Shades of Grey, you wouldn't be like, well, I'd like to finish my book, 50 Shades of Grey, but I guess I better go check to see if Sean wants to have sex first. And if he does, then I guess I won't need to read my 50 Shades of Grey book. Right? It's just, they're not really related, is what I'm trying to say. Right?
Which I think is very helpful. I really do think that's very helpful. And I think Crystal and I have grown a lot, truthfully. Like, that's why I think this latest setback has been so disappointing for both of us, because we've made such strides, and then it was like we just kind of like fell off a cliff, it felt like. And it felt like, whoa, where did all the progress go that we'd made? But I think once we get over the hurt, which I think we're getting there. I think we are making strides. It's just all scary. And I want to trust Crystal. It's the hardest thing for me, because Crystal, sometimes she'll say things that really hurt the trust. And I don't think she realizes that it's happening, but she might say something like, oh my God, you want sex again? Like, we just had it. And then I'm like, oh. And so then I feel like, oh shit, like, sure as hell I ain't ever going to tell her if I need to look at porn, because I'm being judged, for my sex drive. And then she's made it sound like, before she said, like, my hell, like, people don't have this much sex. I like to have sex once a day. We have done it twice a day. We've done it 3 times a day before, but like, I think generally we probably do have sex once a day, which is enough for me, truthfully. And I think Crystal loves sex too, right? But I think when she said things in a moment of, frustration or whatever, she might say something that makes me feel judged for liking sex. And then I'm like, not a safe space. Crystal's not a safe space to be my true self. And I'm open to feedback. Like, if I need to, I'm open to feedback. I'm not saying that there's something wrong with Crystal. I'm just sharing some of the issues. Well,
yeah, and then like he'll say that though, like, you're not a safe space, and then it makes me more mad. Like, oh, so you're gonna start lying again, and and then it just turns into this big fight.
Right. Well, I guess so. The one thing that we want to look at here, and you've mentioned it several times, Sean, is that there is a history of lying here, right? And so, like you said, I lied to her for 15 years about, my pornography usage. And then you just gave a recent example where you lied to her again about whether or not you fantasize about other women. And then this, and not that I'm trying to say that, oh, you're a big fat liar, Sean, how dare you? Like, I understand where that lying comes from. And I think you're getting to the point of it, is that if I'm open about this, if I say my truth about this, then there's going to be humongous repercussions.
Yeah.
To the point that, again, in our upbringing, what's the story? Crystal should leave me or divorce me or not be with me or never trust me again or monitor me for the rest of our lives together, right? And so we lie oftentimes for very good reasons, but I would say, and at the same time, that lying has a repercussion as well, right? And so that lying means that Crystal is now in this space where, okay, so I guess I just need to be the golden retriever and be like, no matter what you tell me, I will be just fine, because otherwise you're not going to tell me anything, right? and then
sometimes she's like in such a great space, and I can be so honest with her, and then other times she just doesn't feel that way, which is I fluctuate too.
Yeah. So this is where I'd like to just introduce the idea of what I call cyclical safety, right? I think sometimes what we all want is to be understood, to be seen, to be accepted for who we are, even in our flaws, or even in our, not necessarily what I would consider flaws, because being high libido or having more interest in another person isn't a flaw, it's just a difference, right? But to be seen in those differences in a way that I'm not going to be othered, or I'm not going to be blamed, or I'm not going to be seen as a problem, right? And that can go for lower libido partners too, right? Or whatever. And so I think we all have those desires. But then we kind of have this expectation that our partner should be like this safe place, a safe place to be able to go and tell these things to, and that we'll get that golden retriever kind of response that no matter what I say, it should be okay. And so what I want to just encourage people to think about is that that's, of course, not realistic, because we all have our own ways of dealing with information, and some information is scary or disappointing or worrisome or confusing, or maybe just not sure how to manage some of the differences that comes up with information. Mm-hmm. So how do we sit with each other's kind of like ability to be slightly, uncomfortable with each other's information and responses, right? Because a lot of times, and I notice this a lot working with Mormon people, because I think we've got the double doozy of avoidance. We've got American culture and we've got Mormon culture. So both of those are avoidant type of cultures as far as conflict is concerned. So if somebody says something and it's slightly offensive or difficult, they'll retreat. Never mind, they'll never mention it again. And so how do we sit in a space where I can tell you, Crystal, yeah, I sometimes think about having, I fantasize about what it would be like to be with another woman. And Crystal could, frown her face and even maybe cry a little bit, right? And not necessarily go batshit crazy, whatever that means, but maybe cry, right? Or frown her face and say, there's something about that hurts my heart, even though, I get that you're just talking about a fantasy, right? And then, and then Sean, instead of like, oh, never mind, no, I don't, and you get into protection mode, you let her be uncomfortable, and you're uncomfortable in her uncomfortableness, right? And you sit with that and you stroke her hand and let's talk about it. What questions do you have, right? And so it's this back and forth. And Crystal, you're not thinking, oh my gosh, I can't be uncomfortable at all, because you're uncomfortable with his uncomfortableness, right? And so we sit in those spaces of what I would say tolerable discomfort as we process and as we resolve, instead of thinking it's got to go super great as soon as I say it, otherwise you're not safe or accepting enough, because otherwise we're just setting each other up for failure. You're never going to be able to be that for each other. You're going to have responses because your partner's different than you.
Yeah.
And we're rubbing up against that difference all the time, right? Like that's a little bit of sandpaper. You're rubbing me a little raw, right? And so as long as you're not beating me with a mallet, maybe we can put up with a little sandpaper. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So those, and then equipping yourself with correct information. Like, I think it's like in the 90th percentile of people who fantasize about another person sexually. Like that's a very common fantasy. And again, we come from a culture where our thoughts were very cinephized. We gave a lot of credibility to just thoughts, that if you think that way, you're going to act that way. So it's hard to distinguish between the two, right? Whereas fantasy, like it's not reality, right? Like it's a whole different word. Fantasy is a whole different word than reality. And so you can fantasize or role play or pretend all kinds of things that are never going to cross the line into reality because of, your commitments or your values or your contracting or even just your interests. There's lots of people that are excited by things, but that they were like, yeah, if that was real life, I wouldn't be excited by it. But in fantasy world, it is exciting.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's been cool. Like, it's been cool to explore different things together and see what works and what doesn't work. And I think that we're kind of on the same page on most everything. I really do. I think that I'm just, part of me said to a friend at a party, I said, does your wife know that you view pornography? Well, then she happened to be there, and she goes, yeah, I know he looks at pornography. I've caught him looking at pornography. And then, and she just acted like it was no big deal. I don't think she was ever Mormon.
Yeah, she wasn't.
But anyway, then after the wife left, I said, hey, like, do you tell her whenever you view pornography? And he's all, no. And he kind of made it seem like, sometimes she can hear that and sometimes it doesn't go over well. And then I just wonder, like, what is and what isn't healthy around that? You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Like, what do we need parameters around that? Do we need instruction around that? Or what is and what isn't an addiction? You see what I'm saying? Like, what education is there around such things? Because I don't think it's unhealthy. Me personally, like, I'm not doing that every day, and I'm not doing that. Certainly never done that multiple times a day. And maybe that's not a bad thing if people do that, but I'm productive. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So my question around all of that, because you're a sex therapist, is like, what does Crystal need to know? What is and what isn't healthy? At what point is that? Like I said, I'm not scared. Like, I'm not hiding. I'm here, and I just want to make sure that I want to make sure that this doesn't keep being. I don't want this to keep being a problem. Is this something that we just need to go mute on and we just don't talk about it anymore? Like, you see what I'm saying?
When you come across information and you realize your partner hasn't always been upfront with you, that is new information to have to deal with. So however you want to classify that, I would like to ask Crystal what her experience with that has been like.
Just since finding out, like, how I feel about finding out about that.
Yeah, what was it like for you when Sean came to you and said, hey, I haven't really talked to you about this kind of stuff. Now, I don't know how he framed it, right? Like, now that we're out, or now that I'd like to be able to talk to you more openly about these kinds of things, I withheld this information. I don't know what language he used. What was that like for you? I mean, I'm guessing there was a combination of feelings.
Yeah, it's I think I still struggle with the jealousy, like, I don't know, comparing myself. So I don't know. And I've always been very jealous our whole marriage, and so has he. We've never really been talked openly about who we thought was attractive, and even in movies, like, we would never say anything like that. And so it's like a whole new thing for us. So it's hard for me to wrap my brain around like that it's okay that he can be attracted to other people, physically. And then, I don't know, it's hard not to feel threatened by it.
And is there any part of that wonders, like, are there still things that he won't tell me because he's afraid to hurt my feelings? Like, do you worry about that?
For the most part, not really. But when I'm not feeling good, then I start thinking, wait, maybe there's more secrets. Maybe there's things that I don't know about. And then my mind just goes crazy.
Yeah, and so I guess that's kind of what I was getting at. Oh, I'll let that ring. I guess that's kind of what I was getting at, is that I'm not trying to paint anybody as the bad guy here. But when we've had certain dynamics in our past, I think it's common when we're scared or frightened or kind of going in reverse a little bit like we do with progress, to not be worried again that those same things may come up again, right? And so, and I think that's a big part of my hope in working with couples such as yourselves in healing from sexual shame, which is really what you're both doing, is how do we make sense of the secrecy? You know, how do we make sense of it? It's usually pretty easy to make sense of it. Like, you were both scared, you were both like thought, you know, whether it's, I'm not going to tell you about premarital experiences, or I'm not going to tell you that I look at porn, or I'm not going to tell you that I was sexually abused, or I'm not going to tell you that I have certain fantasies, or I'm not going to tell you. Usually it's because we're scared, and with good reason, right? You're either going to think differently about me, you're going to see me differently, you're not going to want me, I'm going to become undesirable, you're going to leave me. Very, very scary things. So good reasons to keep secrets. And yet we have to sit with the discomfort that the fact that we did keep secrets means that we now know we have the capacity to keep secrets from each other. And that doesn't necessarily just go away going forward, especially if the reasons why we keep secrets are because, one, I want to protect you from me, which is a very, very simple reason to keep a secret. Or two, I'm scared of how you're going to treat me if I tell you. So it's either I'm protecting you or I'm protecting me. Those things don't go away with transitions. Does that make sense? And this is why I think it's important to talk about secrecy in general. And then complicate it with this concept of privacy, which is, I think, what you were asking before, Sean, which is, you know, do I have to, so if we're not going to have any secrets, okay, Crystal, you know, this week I've got my log here. How many times I, you know, checked into porn.hub or whatever, or pornhub.com, and these are the moments I masturbated, and, you know, things of that nature. So I think that we can contract the privacy into our contract so that we don't necessarily need to feel like we're monitoring each other, or that we're unsafe, or that but that's going to look different for every couple. And like I said, some couples really, you know, they kind of do want to know every time. Like, I'm not going to monitor you, and I'm not going to, if you could just let me know that that's something that you've watched today, I promise I'll just kind of be like, okay, thanks for telling me, right? And some couples contract it like that. Other couples are like, what you do on your own time, as long as it doesn't involve a physical other person or somebody on a chat room, I don't care. I don't want to know. Like, you know, just, we can be together when we're together, and whatever you're doing in the privacy of your own mind or body, that's up to you, right? So lots of different ways people can contract. And there can also be like what I would say explorational timeframes. So if you're just coming out of a religious culture where you're really having a hard time reframing, maybe you contract in a way that's going to look different than maybe it would look like 3 years from now, because you're still adapting and adjusting to some of these, you know, dynamics that are hard. So maybe the goal is to move into, we're not going to care if we masturbate or look at porn, but maybe for the time being, while Crystal's elephant is still really, you know, doing its own thing, we're going to check in with each other more often.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, like, I like that. It's good to think about all those things. And I definitely never want our marriage to feel like we have to, like, disclose everything and confess. Like, I don't want I feel like if I were to say, I want to know how, you know, when you're going to look at it, I don't even like saying that, or how that comes across, or the shame that it puts upon, you know, masturbation or watching erotica, because I want to be free from all of that. So I don't want to be that person like governing Sean, and I don't want to I don't want him to feel like he has to tell me these things. But I think I just, where we went wrong was I just assumed that we were so comfortable with each other, and it wasn't like confessing. It was just like, hey, guess what I did today, kind of thing, you know? And it was like fun, and I felt like, oh, we're in such a good place. Like, we can just talk about this, and we don't have to hide anything, which I don't think he was like intentionally trying to hide it. It's just probably like, happen, and then he wasn't thinking, oh, should I go tell her? I should probably go tell her, you know?
No, I thought that's not true.
It sounds like you were in a totally different place, Sean, actually.
No, she tells me. And the reason she can tell me is because I make it safe. And if she says, you know, hey, guess what? While you were sleeping last night, I masturbated or I watched porn. I'm like, oh, good for you. Like, that's awesome. But I mean, historically, I have, like a turtle, you know, they say if you smack a turtle on the head, it'll put its head in its shell. And then if it comes out again and you smack it with a stick, it'll put its head in. If you do that enough times, that turtle ain't coming back out. That turtle will just stay in the shell and die. And that's how I feel. It's like there's just been too many incidents of jealous, you know, her feeling overwhelmingly jealous and suspicious of me, to where I'm not coming forward with that information, and it's too scary for me, and there's just too much repercussion and too much danger now. So that's how I'm feeling, but it's not to me, it's still not a big deal. I don't want to have to like return and report.
And I never told him he had to. It wasn't like since we discovered this, that I was like, hey, so now you got to tell me every time. I just assumed we were so open and comfortable.
And so the problems arise, Natasha, when she asks me point blank questions like, did you do this? Or have you done that? Or, our daughter's home. Hold on.
Okay.
You know, like she'll ask me these point blank questions, and I so value honesty in other people and integrity. And I felt out of integrity for so long. And so I'm like, now I have integrity. So if she asks me point blank questions, I'm answering them point blank. And some of those answers, she doesn't like them. You see? So I don't know if I should go. I don't want to go back to lying, but I just wish she wouldn't ask those questions.
Right. Well, so you're just bringing up a lot of good points about what it's like to contract privacy into a relationship. You know, it doesn't mean that you're lying or that you're less integritous because if you say something like, I'm not sure I want to answer that right now, or what's that question about? Or can we talk a little bit about what you're worried about before I even answer that question, right? Because in the past, you know, when I answer these kinds of questions, we tend to have a lot of problems, right? Or something along those lines. So we can have conversations like that, and we can even contract whether or not we even want to allow for each other to ask those kinds of questions or not, right? At the same time, I would prefer for there to be as much transparency in a couple as possible without it feeling like it's going to be a blow up, right? And so if we could just figure, and this is where we kind of tap into emotional resilience skills and emotional intelligence skills. It's like, what do I do when I receive information that's upsetting? You know, how do I respond? And at some level, just like cyclical safety is about disclosure, it's about, if I want somebody to be open with me, am I making that openness more likely or less likely, right? And that's, I think, where both of you can probably think about that. And I would just encourage you to give yourselves credit where credit is due. I mean, like, yes, you've had some of these moments where things kind of fall apart. And yet it seems to me through your story, I don't know you very well, but it seems to me that you've done a fairly good job of repairing or, you know, coming out of those maybe darker spaces in ways that you do contract and you do move forward in much healthier spots. And so don't let yourself think, well, just because I've been hit on the turtle head for, you know, a few times that there haven't been other reasons why the turtle head wouldn't come out, right? Like
Crystal's been trying to help me with that, and that's true. Like I've been pretty bruised up, you know, because I'm like, gosh, this honesty game is I'm just paying a price for it. Like, this is bad. Like, and I'm paying a heavy price. And so, but Crystal's been helping me see that how much good has come from it.
And I wouldn't, you know, just like Crystal's dealing with stories and messages that are not just about you, Sean, you're doing that too, right? That you've been treated badly by a system and a part of our society where that defense mechanism in you is strong for good reason.
Yeah.
You're protecting yourself. You're saying, no longer will I be considered a liar or less than, or, you know what I'm saying? So when I mentioned that triggered that response in you, that, wait a minute, there's something here that I'm not okay with, but that's bigger than me and Crystal. Does that make sense? That comes from a lifetime of woundedness.
Yeah. Makes sense.
And so when she hits you with the stick, or maybe she pokes you with the toothpick, it feels like a stick. And I'm not saying that it sounds like, yes, probably Crystal said some things that were very harmful or hurtful. And I'm not hearing Crystal saying, no, I didn't say those things. So I'm not, but I'm just saying, I'm just saying that you also have good evidence as a couple that you come back from these moments in ways that are more, I think, edifying than destructive.
Yeah, that's a good point, that we have to be mindful of the things that are triggering us that may not even have anything to do with our relationship. Just like a lot.
Right. Like, I mean, your stuff, Crystal, for sure, right? Crystal stuff is triggered not by the church, not only by the church, but like I said, American culture.
And that I see that and I understand that. And I just don't want to hurt my wife. You know what I mean? And so that's, again, brings me back to, I've never cheated on my wife. I've never come close to cheating on my wife. I would never cheat on my wife. But there is this other thing. See?
Hold on. Sorry. My cat is trapped in here with me. Sorry. Yeah. And so one thing that I really talk about so often is you're going to hurt your wife.
Yeah.
You are. You're going to hurt your husband. This protective intimacy is such a Mormon thing. It's such a Mormon thing, right? Like this fragile flower that is beautiful, and I can't soil her with my perverse thoughts, right? I can't soil her with my penis and my sex, right? And then Crystal comes at it from this whole like, well, I'm supposed to be a caretaker and be a good wife and take care of his every need. So of course I'll just have as much sex with him as he wants, because then he won't ever want anything else, right? I mean, so you're coming at it again with really good intentions, and yet that's not really what intimacy is about. I think intimacy really is about sitting with the hurts that we offer each other just by being different, and by the hurts that we unintentionally doled out on each other because of the culture we came from. And that's where I think it's just good to take ownership of that. Like, yeah, I did keep secrets from you. It sounds like both of you can say that. And even though I get that that's not totally my fault, I still did that. You know, I still did it, and it had an impact on you. And now we're trying to figure out how that's going to move forward in a totally different way, in a totally different framing, and where we're not necessarily keeping secrets, but we might have some room for privacy, because we're not going to buy into this whole ownership thing. And we're probably going to have more eroticism and more intimacy if we can make room for a little bit of individualism. And we're going to go with the evidence. But we're still hot for each other, and we still have good feelings for each other, and we're still able to engage, and, you know, and back to your question, Sean, about how do you know, if there's a problem, which I would, again, never use the term addicted, but there can be problems with human behavior. Any human behavior can be problematic, from parenting too much to workaholism to looking at porn too often to eating too much to spending too much money, right? So we as humans have a tendency to act impulsive or compulsively with certain behaviors as coping strategies to our anxieties, our depressions, our possible clinical diagnoses if we have some of those, right? So like OCD or PTSD, or things that, you know, come at us legitimately, and then we try to cope. So the question is this particular behavior out of balance in my life? Is it getting in the way? Is it really helping me get what I want, or is it an escape from what I want? You know, is it helping me, you know, slightly? So, I mean, I could, and you have to be careful how you define that, because I could watch one movie and think that's a total waste of time. That's so unhealthy that I watched one movie. And being our perfectionist Mormon selves, we can do that to ourselves, right? Because every single moment should be, you know, proactive. So you have to make room for leisure as being one of the things that you let yourself be balanced in. So if you're using Netflix or 50 Shades of Grey or pornography, or, I don't know, listening to music or whatever you want, just to chillax. And if that's in a time frame, whatever time frame you feel is comfortable for you, then that's usually not problematic. Where it can become problematic is that, you know, maybe I would rather go and look at pornography all the time instead of having a sexual relationship with the person I'm involved with. Again, that usually isn't pornography's fault. That's usually a couple conflict issue. It can be a social anxiety issue for some people. You know, I'd rather go look at porn and masturbate tonight than actually go out on a date or be social, or, you know, do something that's harder for me to do.
Right.
And most people use pornography to masturbate. So most people look at pornography for anywhere from like 3 minutes to about 20 minutes. That's about the usual range. Now, in Mormon land, I know a lot of people see masturbation as worse than pornography. So now they're looking at pornography for like 3 hours, but they're not masturbating. So they're kind of keeping themselves in this ongoing arousal status, and never, you know, the ejaculation or the orgasm is what kind of kicks in that satiation, and then you move on to the next thing, right? So if you're never allowing yourself to reach that moment of climax, then yeah, you might watch it for 3 hours, just like you'd watch a Netflix movie for 3 hours, because you're not getting out of that what it's kind of meant to do in a way.
Yeah.
So then you have to decide, how much time do I want to watch movies for, right? Or anything. So there are definitely ways that we can be problematic with any behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, a lot of people have distress around pornography use because the distress comes from values. I don't think I should be watching it. My spouse doesn't think I should be watching it. My church doesn't think I should be watching it. So that can be a real reason why it's a distress. But again, that's not necessarily a clinical reason why it's a problem. It's a values problem. Right? And so then you're in relationship with a behavior that you feel you shouldn't be in relationship with. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of its own animal, but it doesn't mean that you're addicted. It means that you're really struggling with, how do I not do something that I like doing that gives me some benefits, because it causes, you know, me to not have stress or anxiety, but then it gives me a whole lot of stress and anxiety over here because everybody's upset with me, and even maybe I'm upset with myself for doing this. So
yeah, it's very helpful.
Yeah, that's great information. That's why I think that we wanted to do it publicly, because we know how challenging it's been for us and how new it is, but also at the same time, you know, we're talking a lot about the struggles that we've had, but overall, I wouldn't go back to living in that bubble and feeling all that guilt and shame and the stress and the overwhelm and never feeling enough. I love how much we've grown, and I want to share this publicly, just so like what you're doing is you're talking openly about something that a lot of people are uncomfortable talking about, but so many people need to talk about it, and that's why there's so many problems around it, because nobody dares talk about it.
It's been our number one thing. I mean, I think everything else, post-Mormonism has been easy compared to this.
Yeah, and then so again, and just kind of repost the research. I mean, there's tons of research to show that porn is pleasurable. It does hit our pleasure centers, just like Facebook hits your pleasure centers and puppy pictures and pictures of your grandkids. And so just like it is something that causes pleasure. That's why people are drawn to pleasure, right? So, and people are curious and it's erotic. There's no
And I think in the church, we're always taught that pleasure is bad. Like, that's what it's always been in my mind, that like pleasure is not good.
Well, sexual pleasure, at least we have the concept that we are supposed to have some happiness. We call it the plan of happiness. And we even have this idea that we are created for joy, but not necessarily sexual pleasure. We're very uncomfortable with that, or any sexual pleasure that is kind of outside the box of what has been deemed correct sexual pleasure, righteous sexual pleasure, which is somewhat de-eroticized to begin with, right? It does not, we don't have any research to support most of the myths around it. So it doesn't have the effects where people think that people become more violent towards women or towards children. There's no correlation to becoming criminally, going towards criminal type of sexual behavior because you look at porn. In fact, the opposite is true. There's nothing to show that people want their spouses less or are less attracted to their spouses because they look at porn. In fact, again, especially in the types of bodies known kind of mainstream pornography, feel much more comfortable about their sexual tastes and preferences, like, oh, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one who's turned on by that, right? Or I'm not the only one who looks like that, or things of that nature. So it actually can increase for a lot of people self-esteem, or ideas around, can help them feel more sexually connected to themselves and to their partners. For a lot of couples, it can be an enhancing tool. It's just like one more tool in the toolbox, that we can use to create eroticism and have fun together and playfulness. So the big difference that comes up in research is the religious piece. When people feel like it goes against their values, then there are a lot of problems. Those people tend to see themselves as sick. They tend to see themselves as diseased and addicted. And they tend to have a lot more problems with inability to stop using when they want to be using. Because again, I think it's creating that anxiety feedback loop that I talk so much about. So if you want to believe that you shouldn't look at porn because it's part of your values or it's part of how you feel your God feels, those are definitely your prerogatives to feel that way. And yet you have to be aware that that comes with some risk that the rest of the population isn't dealing with. So it's just a difficult thing to know how to talk about without being offensive, I guess. Mm-hmm.
I would love just to finish with some affirmations around how us women, I think maybe women more so might feel a little threatened or jealousy around pornography. And how can I, because, I'll re-listen to some of your podcasts and then I feel at peace again. And I'm like, okay, I just need to so I need some good affirmations of how is this, remind me how this is not about me or how it doesn't take away from me and all that. Just let's finish off on a good note.
Well, it's true. And I kind of just barely mentioned it, right? That we don't have any research saying that people who look at pornography are less satisfied with their partner's bodies or want to have sex with them less or anything to those. And in fact, it's interesting. I remember listening to this one presenter who was talking about, as Marty Klein, he's written a book called His Porn, Her Pain, just kind of addressing some of these kind of stereotypically gendered messages that we have, around pornography and how they affect men versus women. But he was talking about this couple that came in to see him, and she was like, all he looks at are women with large breasts, like D+ breasts. And here I am, I'm an A, and so obviously I'm not the one he wants to be with. And so, and Marty's kind of, he's got his own style, but he looks at the guy, he's like, do you like her A breasts? And the husband's like, I love her A breasts. Anytime she lets me touch her A breasts, I'm like super, super happy. I love them. She's super sexy. But yeah, and other people, yeah, I guess that would be my preference, is deep breasts, right? Like I'd like, but that doesn't, so just kind of like this very matter of fact question, like, are you unhappy with your wife's breasts? Nope. And do you like to look at something else when you're not with your wife? Yep. And that was it. End of story, right? And we make a lot more story about that. Like somehow she's less than, or he wouldn't want to be with her, or he's somehow compensating, and it was just as simple as, you know, I think, you know, I was drawn to kind of darker Latin men. I'm married to a blonde, I don't know, Germanic looking guy, right? So I don't know why that happened. But I'm okay with that. It doesn't mean that every time I'm with my husband, I'm like, why can't he be a little darker? Did we mess up again with?
Oh, well, I can still hear you, but it's frozen.
Let's see.
But
it's very helpful. I hope you can can you hear me, Natasha?